Hello, I'm Eric Masters, Director of Labor at Wayne State University. Welcome to the first episode of our new series, People at Work. People at Work is about celebrating the work that people do and the many contributions they make to society on a daily basis. We hope you enjoy this episode and those to follow in our new series, People at Work.
When an important union contract is signed, everyone looks forward. They look about the provisions that are in the contract and what those provisions mean for everyone who's involved. Today, we're going to look in a different direction. We're going to look back at the work of the people who created the contract. Martin J. Malloy, retired Vice President, Global Labor Affairs for Ford Motor Company, is our guest on People at Work. Welcome to People at Work. I'm Larry Phobes. Several people have told me that Marty Malloy, when he retired, was one of the most respected labor affairs people in the business. Thanks for being here, Marty.
Oh, thank you very much. That's very kind.
If I go look at your high school yearbook, find your picture and look at the caption underneath, is it going to say most likely to be a union negotiator?
It could, but it probably would have said most likely to be a union activist. Because I came from, I'm from Gary, Indiana. My dad was a mill worker, worked for United States Steel. He belonged to United Steel Workers Union. My whole family is organized. They worked for companies that were organized by unions, and solid Democrats. So working class Irish Catholic Democrats who were very, very pro-union. So I worked hard at school, got a scholarship, went to Purdue University, and my initial ambitions in life, I wanted to be the president of a major union. But when you graduate from a university, those jobs aren't available. So I took the next best thing. I took a job with Ford Motor Company being in labor affairs, so I was working for a company working with unions. So that's a little twist.
Interesting how these careers work out,
Yeah,
isn't it?
It is.
Let's talk a little bit about the negotiation process. The media covers it as we get down to the 11th hour for the contract expiration date, and they mainly talk to people who are the key negotiators, the lead people.
Right.
I got to believe there's a lot longer process and more people involved. Give us a snapshot, just a quick snapshot of the whole process, when it starts, the key milestones, who's involved.
Well, normally when people think of collective bargaining, they think of the union and the company coming together at the big table. You kick off negotiations, you sign it. But there's really three sets of negotiations going on. There is the union and the company. There's a union within a union because they got to get their ducks in line. And then there's a company within a company. And what you're trying to do within a company is get your priorities aligned before you go into bargaining. At Ford Motor Company, we literally start the moment the contract is ratified by the members, then we go into implementation. We're already planning on the next set of negotiations, whether it's a 3 or 4 year agreement, because in our world, the product timeline, the product cycle, and Larry, you worked in product development, is about 4 to 5 years for a new product. So one of the things we strove to do and worked very hard on is try to deliver jobs to the UAW and keep jobs here in America. And a product of a vehicle like the Transit, for instance, that was formerly in Europe, we brought it over and we brought it into Kansas City. So we created a couple thousand jobs in the process. The investment was close to $1 billion. But the decision to bring the Transit in was made well before negotiations. If we weren't on top of our game and keeping our eyes open about what opportunities were available to bring jobs into America, and we waited till the start of negotiations, it's way too late. So contract negotiations and preparation start the moment the contract is delivered and you get on to the next 4 years.
With that long gestation period for the new contract, is there any opportunity to form working relationships with people on the other side of the table that aren't necessarily and always controversial? Or
our philosophy at Ford was negotiations and collective bargaining is a team sport. And it's not just a team sport. A team sport. That means it starts with the CEO of the company, Alan Mulally, He's right in there. Actually, the chairman of the board, Bill Ford. The president of the Americas at the time was Mark Fields. Joe Hendricks was running manufacturing, and then we had John Fleming, myself. I always viewed my job as more kind of orchestrative. I was leading an orchestra and bringing senior management to understand the needs of the union and setting up opportunities for senior union officials to come in and meet senior management. Because it's when you have people truly understanding one another, particularly if there's not a crisis. When you're in negotiations, you kick off negotiations in July, and you got to get a deal by September 14th when the contract expires. You're under tremendous time pressures. You want to have that understanding, so people understand one another's interest, in a period in which they can actually have a rich dialogue and understand each other's point of view. That happens way before you start negotiations.
Even with a good working relationship, because you're able to do it over the time, there's still, most people see the negotiations process as an us versus them, right? What can you do in the early part of the negotiation to find some common ground, some common basis that's a framework that leads you through to the end?
It's very easy to fall in the trap. It's us versus them. Very easily. People's tempers get short. People are pressured by their constituents, either side. What I think the most important thing are the assumptions each party has. But the bottom line is what we continue to strive for the union to understand is we got to have a business case. We'll build cars and trucks in the United States, but we got to have a business case. I mean, what board of directors would give the company $1 billion to build a product you can't get an adequate return on investment for? A part of that business case is labor costs. So we'd sit down with the union, explain in detail, and they can bring their subject matter experts in to understand our business case and what we're trying to achieve.
Those are the kind of assumptions that you were talking about?
Yeah, and I found the UAW to be a terrific union to deal with. They're very honest. They base their assumptions on business realities. And dealing with a union like that, I think you can come to a common ground and deliver an agreement which address the interests of the employees and address the interests of the company and the shareholders who are, we work at the bequest of the shareholders. If they don't give you your money through their stock, you don't have a company. You don't have anything there. But I think our success with the UAW is both of us are coming from a common assumption and we're working to meet each other's interests.
Even if you have the common assumptions, and we assume that you do, there's still all these external factors, these external constraints that get in the way. Market conditions, global economics, competitive issues, the financial health of the company.
Right.
How do you deal with all those unchangeable externals?
Well, you're right. I mean, we avoided bankruptcy in 08, 09, as you know. We couldn't have done that without the UAW. We couldn't have done that without addressing each of those external factors. Now, what I thought was really important, what we did with the union, is that we sat down and went through all those external issues for them so they understood them very clearly what our challenges were. These were issues outside the realm of the collective bargaining agreement. These are outside the four walls of the agreement. Some companies might respond to the union when they ask questions, but that's none of your business because that's not within the agreement. We will talk to you about elements in the agreement. We were not going to talk to you about things that are extraneous to the agreement. That was not the strategy we used. We sat down with the union and went through the challenges Ford Motor Company was faced with, whether they're finance challenges, purchasing challenges, supplier challenges, dealer challenges, so they can understand the entire picture of what we were facing in order to avoid bankruptcy. And I think that demonstrated, I think, the honesty of the company, our forthright nature in terms of sharing with the union and not looking at it as we versus them, but look at it collective. I used to have a picture above my desk. It had these four guys in a rowboat and the holes at the end of the boat. And these two poor guys are all getting wet at the end of the boat. And these guys up here are looking down at them and said, sure, I'm glad the hole isn't in my end of the boat. The bottom line to this is that we're all in the same boat. We collectively are either going to make it or not make it. And I think that's one of the reasons we at Ford Motor Company didn't have to take the money. And I got to tell you, I spoke to a lot of hourly audiences, and I would say, how proud are you guys we didn't take the money? they're as proud of Ford Motor Company not taking the money as any salaried employee.
At the end of the day, we're talking about negotiations, us versus them. It's just employees talking to employees.
Right. They aren't
the bad guys.
No, they're not the bad guys. I got to tell you, the worst thing in collective bargaining, either side demonizes each other. You know, the union, which is typically left of center, can demonize the company people as a bunch of greedy, you know. The company guys who are right of center can look at these guys and say they're a bunch of socialists running around. It's none of that. All that's garbage. All of it's garbage. You've got a business case in which you have to sit down and negotiate and try to get a fair settlement so each party's interest is reached and you treat people fairly. Alan Mulally used to call it profitable growth for all. And he has to have a curve like going up like that, you know, profitable growth for all. We delivered profit-sharing checks of $8,300 and then $8,800 last year. That's a pretty darn good check for an hourly guy on the production line, and they appreciate it, but they deserve it because they're part of the turnaround of Ford Motor Company just as much as anybody else.
What was the reaction when you started offering up all this information they'd never seen before?
You know, I got to tell you what, I think that the first reaction was, holy Toledo, and I think there's hesitancy on both sides when you all of a sudden are acting in a manner which is truly open and not consistent of the typical behavior. You're kind of taken back in both ways. We were taken back by them too. But after a while, you develop a deep understanding and appreciation for the other person's point of view, and you start working for a outcome. I call it at the generative dialogue. The highest level is called generative dialogue. And it's when you're really at a state of problem solving where you're not just pointing out your point of view, you're building on another person's point of view and trying to get to a higher level solution. That's very difficult to do. It takes time, and it takes a profoundly strong relationship to accomplish.
So we're right back to a couple minutes ago talking about that relationship building.
Right.
On the way into the studio today, I had a thought. If I was writing a movie, a make-believe fictional movie for Hollywood about negotiation process, I could see a scenario where the movie opens, everything's fine, everything's progressing along, some sort of chaos comes in, they're down to the 11th hour, somebody has an aha moment 2 minutes before midnight, solves the problem, and everybody lives happily ever after.
Right.
Is that even close?
No, not even close. I'd say 95% of the issues in collective bargaining are pretty much thought through carefully by the parties. There's always 2 or 3 issues that come to the end. I will say this: I went about 58 hours straight without sleeping in 07, 011, and we had negotiations in 09. 2 or 3 days without sleeping in World Headquarters, and it's on a Neanderthalish, quite frankly. I'm not a big fan of it. Pounding out the table of late at night bargaining. Part of that is true. Part of that is accurate. But most of the issues have been sorted through. The product development stuff, for instance. We delivered $16 billion of investment in the last negotiation. We promised 12,000 jobs. Ford will deliver over 12,000 jobs. You don't do that. You don't do that on a weekend. That's planned over years and years and years. Thoughtful planning and executing it with the help of the entire team, product development, purchasing, finance, the whole group, all working together to deliver.
When we talked the other day, you made an interesting statement. You said that when you were doing the contract work, you saw it as an organizational development task to drive change through the company, not just get a contract. Right. Explain that.
Well, everyone has to sit back and look at their own job. And I always looked at Vice President of Labor Affairs. I wasn't a litigator. I'm not a lawyer by trade. And I'm not a litigious guy. I'm not the kind of guy that's going to, let me show you what was done in 1958 and that kind of stuff. You have to know the contract and the implications of what you decide upon. That's very important. But you think of it in a holistic picture of what you're trying to do. You're trying to change from the present state to the future state. And I think at the end of the day, senior leaders, or leaders in general, are paid to drive change, paid to implement change. So you're taking contract A, you want to go to contract B. It's an organizational change initiative, all from soup to nuts. So if you think of yourself as I'm going to win this, I'm going to beat him. Like you think of an attorney. I think of some of the things that are going on in Congress now. I'm going to beat those sons of so and so. doesn't accomplish the objective. Oh, by the way, even if you win, you tick them off.
So you lost.
You lost. You got to deal with the contract. So now you got the upper hand. Okay, now you tricked them. Well, good luck with that. Good luck with implementing the contract. Good luck with the relationship building. Good luck for living together for the next X number of years as a company and a union trying to satisfy our customer demands. Doesn't work like that.
You've got a book coming out, or a book that you co-authored early next year, published by MIT Press.
Right.
Title is Inside the Ford UAW?
Yeah, Inside the Ford UAW Transformation. And it really gets into what were the steps taken behind the scenes that accomplish an outcome which Ford did not have to go through bankruptcy, that UAW had its interests met, the company had its interests met, and we took stock that was at about buck and a penny a share, up to most recently it was $18, with a net cap value formerly of $6 billion to over $70 billion. We worked hard to achieve that outcome, and the book is basically all the little pieces which occurred to deliver that result.
So the transformation was driven by the tough times?
Well, that's an interesting. There's an old saying, "Need is the mother of invention," and I do think the tough times drive change much more rapidly than it would happen by itself. I think the key is having the leaders who, when you're challenged with that tough change, can figure out ways to accomplish your objectives, i.e., avoid bankruptcy.
And that worked out, and this transformation worked out for both organizations?
Well, we're hiring people at Ford. I'm very proud of what Ford Motor Company has done, and I'm equally proud, quite frankly, and I've always been proud of working with the UAW. It's a great union, and they're great people in the UAW. I work with some tremendous union leaders who I look back at my career, and quite frankly, I consider them colleagues and friends.
We've talked quite a bit about the work you've done and working with the company, getting through the tough times, and you and the UAW, Ford and the UAW get through it. Get out your crystal ball, Marty. Give us a look into the future. Where is labor affairs and all that sort of thing headed in the United States and around the world?
It's very challenging. The National Labor Relations Board has been in a great deal of flux. Supreme Court ruled most recently the appointments that Obama made during the recess appointments were not valid, and you have a lot of decisions that were involved in that. From a national perspective, and particularly with the public sector unions, it's a tough time in America for organized labor. So there's a lot going on. The percentage of the workforce in the private sector which is under a contract is probably around 6%, and there's a lot of challenges in the public sector with what's happening in Wisconsin.
6% compared to?
It would be about FDR, and FDR after about the time FDR was president, it was in around 35%. So there's been a terrible hit to organized labor. A lot of that has been taken, quite frankly, in the automotive industry, where it's not just the big three anymore. You've got the transplants, which is Toyota and the Nissan and so forth. And they're basically non-union, with the exception of Mitsubishi in Illinois. But it's taken a lot of union jobs away. So it's a challenge for organized labor moving forward. There's no doubt about it.
Marty, I've got one last question for you. Let's assume, just hypothetically, that one of the major labor unions in the country, not related to automotive, hires you as a consultant to help them get ready for the next negotiation.
Right.
What's going to be your big piece of advice for them?
The big piece of advice would be, first of all, understand the business case of the company in which you're dealing with, and thoroughly understand it. I mean, don't just trot somebody in for a 5-minute presentation and say, here's what we're doing. Understand the numbers extremely well. Understand their business plan. So then you have an idea of, is this company doing well? Is it doing poorly? Can it afford an increase? Second thing I would do is you better understand healthcare and the implications of healthcare moving forward. There's a lot of moving pieces in healthcare in this country. And thirdly, I would recommend that they use interest-based bargaining principles moving forward. Soft on people, tough on issues. So, summarize it. You look at your interests, I'll look at my interests. Let's see if there's compatibility. Let's get to a higher level solution. Don't walk in negotiations saying, here's what we want, bang the table. Here's what I want, bang the table. If you don't do this, I'm going to strike you. Okay? There's no dialogue. There's no higher level solution. And be first and foremost, as a union, be a business person. As a businessman, businesswoman, be a business person and make decisions based on business realities.
Thanks for being here, Marty. Join us again next time for another edition of People at Work.